I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a spoonful of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities of Music. Subscribe to Velocities of Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to you each week. Want to help Velocities of Music grow? You can. Velocities of Music was founded on the idea of creating an enriching discussion about modern music. Please share Velocities of Music with the music enthusiasts in your life. Together, we can move music discussion forward. Tom.
Yeah.
In our last podcast, we kicked off the Spoon Artist Deep Dive.
Yes.
And we covered Spoon's early history. We covered their first 4 albums, Telephono, A Series of Sneaks, Girls Can Tell, and Kill the Moonlight. And now, Spoon have really arrived.
Yeah.
They have achieved 4 albums. They've gotten some serious accolades from critics, and they've had their first hit single. So they kind of have everything going for them at this point. And in 2005, the band released an album called Gimme Fiction, which you just picked up on vinyl yesterday.
I did.
You got it, buddy.
Yeah, you got it quite a while back.
I did.
Now we both got that one.
It sounds amazing, too.
All right, I look forward to listening to it. Even though I'm probably going to want to take a break from Spoon for a while after this deep dive. But at some point, I'll put that on and rediscover it and love it. All right, so let's jump into Gimme Fiction. Gimme Fiction 2005, so we saw a very quick turnaround between Girls Can Tell and Kill the Moonlight. Spoon was really trying to get their momentum going, and they did a great job of it. But now they took a few years between Kill the Moonlight and Gimme Fiction. Britt Daniel wanted to go, a bit more into, not like total isolation, but really wanted to focus on the songwriting and the crafting for this album. And at first, I think he had a little bit of difficulty, but they ended up really hitting their stride and turning around some great songs for this. Stylistically, I want to point out, I think that on Gimme Fiction, they really take the best attributes of Girls Can Tell and Kill the Moonlight and bring them together.
Yeah.
These songs sound much more like fleshed out, full songs than anything on Kill the Moonlight. But they incorporate a lot of those cool kind of, auxiliary elements and experimental elements that we heard on Kill the Moonlight, but maybe not quite so much on Girls Can Tell. And I love that about this. We also start hearing some more of their pop influences. I think that at this point in their career, this is really their poppiest album, but not to its detriment. Sure. I actually think that it succeeds for that reason because it complements a lot of Britt Daniel's strong songwriting approaches and methods. On the first track, The Beast and Dragon Adored, I think he sounds damn near like John Lennon. On track 2, The Two Sides of Monsieur Valentine, to me that sounds like a Tom Petty track. Now he's pulling influences from farther back in the rock era and really making it work. On track 3, I Turn My Camera On. I'm not just going to go through every track and compare it to another artist, by the way, but just these first few, just so you know what you get a taste of right away. I Turn My Camera On is a really cool falsetto-focused track that it was inspired by Prince, and that was one, I guess, that Britt had been working on for a while and didn't really know how to present, and then realized I should do this in falsetto.
I turn my camera on, I cut my fingers on the way I'm slipping away, I turn my fingers.
That's a brilliant decision, because if you imagine I Turn My Camera On being sung in like a normal register, it just wouldn't have worked the same. That song's got a great bass groove to go along with it.
Yeah, and I think that what you're talking about there really underscores the fact that, like, if you think about where Spoon came from and what we talked about in the last podcast of part 1 of the Spoon deep dive was you kind of saw this pendulum swinging. They did Telephono, which was Pixie's Wire, Pavement. They're like just trying to establish themselves with their the sound that they were going for. They realized that they were shifting on Series of Sneaks, but they were still very much married to that rock structure. The pendulum started swinging. Girls Can Tell, they kind of bottomed out, and then got kind of experimental on Kill the Moonlight. Well, now they're back, and they've kind of run the gamut. They have all the tools that they could possibly need here. They've They've opened up the toy chest of different instruments that they could use to make their albums. They've tried different song styles. They've tried different vocal interpretations. Like, they've really done it all at this point. Like, pretty much anything is at their disposal. They can do anything that they want. And what they chose to do with the professionalism that they've had on every single record up until now is make the perfect Spoon album to date. And Gimme Fiction songs, I think, achieve this because they are exceptionally well crafted. Like early on, they establish great melodies early in the song. You can hear this from the first track, both in the vocals and in the instrumentation. And then they take that idea that the song establishes, and they build on it, usually through dynamics and layers of just chaotic noise and accents that they put in. Usually a lot of that accent is that noisy guitar that Spoon was founded on. So you really hear them growing as songwriters here. And I gotta say, a number of my favorite Spoon tracks, period, are on this one. I Turn My Camera On is the best Spoon song, period.
I don't blame you, man.
There is, in my opinion, there is just not a Spoon song that you can say is better than that. You can probably make a few arguments, but I Turn My Camera On. I will be damned if anyone can put that song on and not dance to it. You are going to dance to that song.
You will dance.
It's an earworm. It's an earworm. You cannot get away from it as soon as you hear it. But the thing is that they surround that song. That's track 3 on this record, and that was a huge single. Got used everywhere. But that song is surrounded by other good songs. It's followed up by track 4, My Mathematical Mind, which has this great beat and groove. It has piano, bass, and drums.
I love the piano accents in that one.
Really builds into this, subtle builds. That's what Spoon's all about. Subtle, gradual, very crafted builds into this kind of like noisy, distorted explosion, which really works well. There's also a poppier, upbeat track, track 6, Sister Jack.
Yeah,
has this great chorus, and Spoon knows how to provide a great chorus as he's driving electric guitars. And then track 7, I Summon You, is a really memorable track. Has this heartfelt acoustic guitar, some horns that come in, and very melancholic vocal melodies. And I think that really just knocks it out of the park.
Remember the weight of the world, it's a sound that we used to buy on cassette and 45.
Just in those tracks I named, you have this huge variety in different sounds, but every song on this record achieves something like that.
It's very cohesive like that. I have a lot of good memories from this album because first off, Sister Jack was the first Spoon song I ever heard.
Oh, that's cool.
I started listening to them around the time this came out, and I was like, oh, that's a cool, just kind of upbeat, fun alternative pop rock song, and I think it really succeeds. One thing that song does also that we hadn't really seen much on the last couple albums, but we did see on the first 2, is playing around with time signatures. They used to do a lot in 5 and 7 and 9, and Sister Jack near the end of the song, and they add an extra beat into the repeats. I think that's a pretty neat songwriting tactic. Also, track 7, I Summon You, which is one of my favorite Spoon songs. Back in my wedding DJ days, Jake, I had that in my dinner mix for weddings. So I would play that at weddings a lot, and I always looked forward to hearing that one. So that's what I always think of when I hear that song. So Jake, I'm gonna go off for a little bit here. I have one criticism of this album, and then I have some more praise. So I'm making kind of a compliment sandwich here. All right. Now, I once again, I think you like this album a little bit more than I do. I think
I just like Spoon a little bit more than
you probably do, but I still like them a lot. The deal for me is the first 7 tracks on this album are pretty much perfection, and then the last 4 slump a little bit for me.
I won't even argue with you.
Really? Okay.
I won't even argue with you. I think the first... Like, in my track picks, I picked 6 tracks on this record, and the only track in the first 7 that I didn't pick is track 5, The Delicate Place, and I still like that song. It's just, it's the kind of the calm down after the onslaught of the first 4 just behemoth tracks that you heard.
And I love that track because I think as a calm down, it works really well.
It totally does.
And that,
I think I just felt guilty picking 7 tracks in a row.
Right. Now, of the last 4, I think track 10, They Never Got You, is one of the better, is the best of those four. I think that song's pretty good. But particularly track 9, Was It You, especially for being tied with track 4, My Mathematical Mind, as being the longest track on the album at just over 5 minutes. That for me is the weakest song, and when the weakest song on an album is also like the longest song on an album, that bothers me a little bit. It's not enough for me to dislike this album because there's so many tracks on here I want to come back to. But that's just my one small complaint.
I won't even disagree with you. I like the first 7 tracks so well, and I like the last 4 as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's not that they're just not up to the same level.
Sure.
But had they made this album shorter, it wouldn't, it's 43 minutes long. So this album is a little bit longer than what we've seen so far. But it's also like, they probably could have cut Was It You, but I have a tendency to like that song. Like, I don't think it's bad. It's a bad song that it needs to be cut.
It still provides something different.
Yeah, it has a great bass line to it. So I mean, to me, this song is just it rules. It's ruled by its highlights, which there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. This is my favorite Spoon album. Very, very just has a close edge over Girls Can Tell. But I wouldn't give this a 100 if we were scoring it. It'd be like mid 90s, and the reason is because that those last 4 songs don't hold up to the first 7. But I think that what this accomplishes for Spoon is this is, in my opinion, the best Spoon record. Because of the ground that those track highlights really accomplish.
Sure. One big piece of praise I want to give this is one thing they're starting to perfect here that I think we're going to see on the next the next several albums they come out with that we're going to talk about, Jake. We started to see it a little bit on Girls Can Tell, not as much on Kill the Moonlight, but here one thing they really perfect is song structure. These songs are able to be memorable without relying on choruses. And that is huge. That is huge when artists can do that. I mean, like, to me, actually that's something I think the Pixies do really well, but they didn't do that. Spoon wasn't able to really achieve that back when they sounded more like the Pixies. To me, though, the band that is the ultimate example of that is the Smiths. You listen to the Smiths, and they're putting these songs together that have similar components that might repeat, but the vocals change a little bit, but it doesn't quite feel like a chorus. You don't know what the chorus is. You just know that you like what you're listening to.
Right.
And Spoon nails that on this album.
They totally do.
They are at that level.
It's almost as if they invert it, and the verses are choruses.
Yeah.
And they don't need a chorus. Once you've turned your verses into choruses, what do you even need a chorus for? You don't need that crutch.
Right.
You don't need that crutch.
Like you mentioned, I Turned My Camera On as like pretty much the ultimate Spoon song, right? Like, what's really the chorus of that song? What is it? Like, I don't know. Like, you could kind of consider, well, maybe when they go into that different kind of groove and the vocals take more of a step back. But to me, if the vocals are taking more of a step back, is it really a chorus? Is it really a chorus hook? To me, are you bobbing your head just listening to it in your head?
I'm listening to Turn My Camera
On. But even from there, The Beast and Dragon Adored, Sister Jack, I Summon You, these, like, they kind of have choruses, but they're not really choruses. They're like repeated refrain lines. So the structure is all over the place, and I love that.
So moving on to 2007, 2 years later, Spoon released their next record, Gaga, Gaga, Gaga.
Mm-hmm.
Gaga, Gaga.
Gaga, Gaga.
I don't know. I think that title is a reference to Dadaism. Dadaism.
You know what
you can erase some of that.
You know what I read is Gaga, Gaga, Gaga was the original title of track 2, The Ghost of You Lingers.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
It's meant to like phonetically mimic that staccato piano sound that's in there, the ga 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 ga.
Oh.
So they were originally going to call that song that. They decided to change the name of the song, which once again I think was a strategic and smart choice. But they kept it for the album title.
Oh, that's really cool.
Kind of neat, isn't it?
That is really, really neat. So how would you describe the sound of Gaga, Gaga, Gaga?
Well, I think where we see them coming from on Gimme Fiction, Gimme Fiction was such a well-crafted album. And everything, once again, as we always see with Spoon, every detail was immaculate.
Every single sound you heard was purposeful.
Right. On Gaga, 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 I think they almost like it's like they want to trick the listener into thinking they've abandoned that when really they haven't. Gaga Gaga Ga to me sounds like more controlled chaos.
Yeah.
It has a much more open sound to it. They're using, once again, they're the champions of auxiliary percussion. I feel like shakers, hand claps, things like that. And so there's a much larger sense of space. They're starting to use more like just studio talk.
Yeah.
There's
There's a number of moments in here where it's just recordings of them just talking in the studio that they incorporated into the songs, and it's meant to make it more casual, but every one of those is very strategically picked and placed and produced in a way that it blends with the song.
So it's kind of this idea of controlled chaos is how I would call it. It sounds more chaotic. It sounds almost a little bit messier, but because they're doing that on purpose and because they're still deliberate about where they choose to have it sound like that, it's still very artfully done and well crafted. This album, though, I think we're starting to see them get even a little bit more upbeat. To me, this album is all about the grooves. You have great bass grooves on several tracks, especially in the middle with "Don't You Ever," "Rhythm and Soul," Eddie's "Raga."
You can break my legs, you can kick me downstairs. Oh, but there ain't no getting over Joni Helmet. Just let me walk.
Those middle tracks have great bass grooves. The Underdog has those horn accents and a lot of focus on the auxiliary rhythms as well.
I wanna forget how convention fits.
This album's a little bit more all over the place. I think it's more eclectic than Gimme Fiction was, but I think that the core of the songwriting is much more grounded. I think this starts to tilt in the direction, though, of being a little bit more experimental like Kill the Moonlight was. So, Jake, I got to get this out of the way. Track 2 on Gaga Gaga Ga, The Ghost of You Lingers, has to be, to me, the most perplexing song in Spoon's catalog.
Okay.
I don't understand what the thought was behind that song. I think it sounds kind of cool. Like I mentioned in reference to the album name, it's got that staccato piano that just sounds kind of like aggressively and unnaturally looped. And it's got just these strange vocals sweeping from side to side that are very reverb laden. It's a very experimental track. There's really not much grounding it. And I think it's a really odd choice for the second track on this album. Yeah. Because especially since Don't Make Me a Target, first, I love that song.
I do too.
I think it's a terrific opener. It comes out with such a bang. It's got an infectious vocal hook that Britt Daniels performs just perfectly. And then it goes into The Ghost of You Lingers, which is a total what the hell moment.
Yeah. Spoon hadn't done anything like that up to this point. And I think that The Ghost of You Lingers really shows how they're experimenting, obviously, because you haven't heard anything like that up to this point. But it also kind of just meanders. It doesn't accomplish a whole lot, but really sets a conflicting mood with the first track, Don't Make Me a Target, which it's kind of... The album doesn't make a statement, I think, until you really get to track 3. You got Your Cherry Bomb and Don't You Ever track 4, which are kind of like a little bit poppier. They're incorporating a more variety of instruments like bells and sax and things like that. Don't You Ever it's kind of a party track. It's a little bit more fun.
It's a cover too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Upbeat has that great vocal melody that Britt Daniel performs very well.
But don't you ever be down? I said don't ever, because it's gonna keep 'em hanging around.
So overall, like, I think that you're totally right. This kind of the transition between Gimme Fiction and Gaga Gaga Ga reminds me a lot of Blur between Self-Titled and 13.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because Self-Titled, for what Blur was going for, they kind of perfected it. Is kind of here's all the stuff that we did before. Okay, now this is what we're really going to sound like. And then 13 just builds on that, but in a more experimental way. These guys are trying to take their craft somewhere new, but when you have just released a perfect record, you have kind of a couple choices. You have to either drastically change your sound. I'm going to pull the every Velocities of Music podcast Radiohead reference. It's like you have to pull a Radiohead and go from OK Computer to Kid A, which is extremely difficult to pull off. Or you have to kind of subtly do it and work in a few tracks that experiment to kind of expand your palette. And Spoon is not a groundbreaking band. If you're looking for groundbreaking, this is not the band for you. This is a band that if you want really well done, really heady, really well thought out, and very listenable and accessible, this is your band. And so Spoon, what they're doing is they're gradually trying to expand and experiment with their sound and take it to new levels, which I think that, again, just like as we saw as you compared, Tom, this album to Kill the Moonlight, I think that similarly this album kind of does that. It takes them, it opens doors for them, and while it does that at the expense of that straight through album listen, it still at the same time opens the door so that they can do more creative things in the future.
Yeah. For me, just the album placement, the track sequencing choice of putting The Ghost of You Lingers at track 2 makes no sense to me. I think that would have made more sense as track 8 or 9 near the end of the album. Maybe like after My Little Japanese Cigarette Case, because first off, I love that song, and that song has this weird kind of like sinister undertone to it, right? And so I think going from that into The Ghost of You Lingers and then picking it back up for the end of the album with Finer Feelings and Black Like Me, I think would have made a little bit more sense. But it's not entirely to the album's detriment. I think that the reason this album is remembered so well as being one of Spoon's best albums is just because it does have so many good tracks on here. I think The Underdog is a great track, another big single for them, very memorable song, and also I think another lyrical highlight, a song where the lyrics really mean something and try to convey a message that isn't just, these kind of evocative one line at a time deals. But I will say, once again, similar to Kill the Moonlight, I think this album's a little bit overrated because while it relies on the strength of those track by track experience, I think as an album, when you get to the end of it, I at least don't feel like a mark was really left on me. I don't feel like it accomplishes anything all that grand in scope. I think it's just a really solid collection of songs.
I totally agree. And where Gimme Fiction was 43 minutes long and filled it nicely, this is 36 and doesn't. And I think that says something. The lower lows that you hear on the tracks that don't really hit it out of the park on this one, if they're not experimenting and kind of just out there, not the highlights, then they're kind of boilerplate Spoon tracks at this point. So they really kind of struggled with crafting the perfect record. And this one's more about the songs than the album listening experience, I think.
3 years later, after Gaga 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 in 2010, we have Spoon's 7th album, Transference. And Transference is quite a different album for them, I feel like, because where everything that they had done to this point was very strategic and deliberate, here they really allowed it to get a little bit messy. And this, once again, was a deliberate choice by Britt Daniels. He mentioned they were at a point in their career where they'd started finding the success that they were really looking for. And so now they were like, okay, let's mess around a little bit. They were a little more willing to make mistakes. And for that reason, I think what you have on Transference is not necessarily one of the strongest Spoon albums, but also probably one of the more interesting ones. One thing they did was they started developing these songs like on 4-track, recording demos and everything. And then when they tried to recreate those in the studio, they didn't really come off the same way. So they decided to keep some of the 4-track versions. You see that like on track 7, Trouble Comes Running. Britt Daniels said, that's a song that in terms of writing could have been like a big single for them, but it didn't feel right to present it that way. So they left it sounding kind of rough and underdeveloped. I think in a way I have a lot of respect for an artist who realizes that an early rough version of a song conveys the message they're going for better than a polished version. But at the same time, I think that's the reason that this album doesn't quite come off as one of Spoon's stronger albums.
I totally agree with that. And I think that this kind of, even though there's 3 years of time difference between Gaga, 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 and Transference, I think that these are actually pretty similar records. Transference is a bit experimental, and I think it also relies on the success of a few key tracks,
for sure,
and it has some low points to it. Honestly, like there's several tracks on here that I think are some of Spoon's weaker tracks of the modern Spoon era, and I think that part of that is just because I don't know for sure. I think the band has come out and said that they were pretty tired and kind of getting down and the whole songwriting process, and I can only imagine the amount of work it takes to perfect and get that perfect Spoon sound, the amount of time in the studio, but it has to be grueling on them, and especially when you've already kind of it's hard for a band once they've had a super successful record. And keep in mind, Kill the Moonlight from the band standpoint was a success. Gimme Fiction absolutely was, and Gaga 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 certainly was, both critically and from a singles perspective. Like they had achieved a lot of success there. So from Spoon's perspective, they've done pretty well, and that has to get tiring after you gotta tour, you gotta write, you gotta deal with all the fame. So I kind of understand that. 4 tracks in a row. Track 3, The Mystery Zone. Track 4, Who Makes Your Money. Track 5, Written in Reverse. And track 6, I Saw the Light. All, in my opinion, standout tracks. The first 3 there, The Mystery Zone, Who Makes Your Money, Written in Reverse, are really cool. And what I'll give Spoon credit for here is that these are a little bit, they're experimenting in the production a bit. And I really like that. I think that these, The Mystery Zone's a little bit longer. Written in Reverse goes a little over 4 minutes. So you're starting to see longer track lengths, which is kind of cool. Spoon's playing with their sound and their structure. They're allowing these things to get a bit more experimental. But this album just has an aura of sadness and tiredness, which kind of matches the band's description of where they were at.
Yeah, you can tell that they're burnt out, and I mean a lot of that is when you say as a band, let's just use the 4-track stuff. Well, I'm not going to go back on my compliment. I do respect when an artist does that. I think that's tactful. It also seems like they're more trying to justify to themselves ways to just get the thing done, right? Like they don't want to take the time to give this album the level of detail treatment that they did their previous albums. And I think that for Transference, it works way better than it would for any other Spoon album because some of the songs kind of call for it, but it also still is a little bit of a cop-out.
Sure.
These guys are tired. They are kind of burnt out. Now, this is actually the one time I'll say, Jake, I think I do like this album a little bit better than you. Some of these songs really do stick with me. The highlights you mentioned, I totally agree with. My favorite track on here is The Mystery Zone.
Picture yourself set up for good and the whole of the life. Mystery Zone.
Another song that really succeeds without necessarily having a defined chorus. It just kind of goes on. But it really capitalizes on that, that recurring line of the Mystery Zone. What the hell is the Mystery Zone? Well, this is another example where Britt Daniels' really odd lyrics, he's able to get away with it because the whole concept of the song is that it's the Mystery Zone and you don't know what it is, right? So, once again, kind of an area where you could call it a cop-out, but because Spoon's so good at this point, I think they're able to get away with it. I really do like the track 7, Trouble Comes Running.
Trouble comes running, here it come running again. Well, alright, I gotta take it away.
Goodnight Laura is a pretty good ballad that to me harkens back to like 10:20 a.m. on Girls Can Tell.
Yeah, good point.
But it's not necessarily like a mind-blowingly good song.
Good night, Laura, don't you know you better wait, so now it's time for sleeping.
And then the last couple tracks are decent. I do like Got Nothing and Nobody Gets Me But You. But once again, I think that for the entire album experience, there's nothing on here that's like, whoa, man, this is great. Like we got on albums like Girls Can Tell and Gimme Fiction.
Yeah, the highs aren't quite as high on
Yeah.
this one. And the lows, to me, like, you don't have any... Spoon never makes any offensively bad song, in my opinion, but, like, this just doesn't feel like a really standout listen. It's more of one of Spoon's kind of middling albums.
Sure. Following Transference in 2010, I think the band very intelligently acknowledged that they were burnt out. They needed a little bit of a break from things. The members went on to some other side projects. We saw Britt Daniel form the band Divine Fits with Dan Beckner of Wolf Parade. So they put out that album, which I think was kind of invigorating. I think artists always need to get out of their own projects every now and then and explore other things and then bring back what they've learned to their other projects. That's what it's all about, is that people experience. So when they came back together for They Want My Soul, they Want My Soul in 2014, 4 years after Transference, after that kind of break they took when they decided to get back together and put out another album. This will be their first album since a series of sneaks that is not on Merge. They Want My Soul was released on Loma Vista record label. And they also produced this with David Friedman, who we've seen on a number of albums. He's worked with anyone from The Flaming Lips to Thursday to Sparkle Horse. Like, he's done a lot of different stuff and is a really cool producer. They Want My Soul. You want me to just jump in, man? I'm just going to do it.
Go ahead.
This is my favorite Spoon album. And I will say that with the disclaimer that I in no way think this is the definitive Spoon album. I think if you want to choose a definitive Spoon album, it's got to be either Girls Can Tell or Gimme Fiction. But They Want My Soul, while it's not a huge stylistic jump, I feel like it just has, for me, their strongest collection of songwriting. I think the first 7 tracks on here really, for me, are just absolutely perfect. And one thing that they do in the production here that I've noticed that is kind of a David Friedman thing is there's just this slight layer of distortion through the whole thing. Everything sparkles with this just like slightly overdriven sheen that you hear in the drums. Mm-hmm. Every time the snare drum hits, you hear it in every guitar clang. And I like that sound to it because I think it fits really well with the songs here.
I totally agree with you. The production on this album is absolutely perfect. Everything is mixed perfectly. The guitars are super loud. There is a moment where I just have to like set aside when you put this album on because it hits me every time how awesome those guitars sound, how just clangy as hell they are. The vocals are just right. The drums don't overpower. Everything is defined, and there's this sense of spatial separation to each of the sonic elements, which is absolutely imperative for Spoon and their approach to songwriting. One thing that I really like about They Want My Soul is where I would criticize Transference and Gaga, Gaga, Gaga. They Want My Soul has a very nice flow as an album. Mm-hmm. And they do this because they're using kind of this oscillating format to the album structure. It starts off with Rent I Pay, track 1, which is this driving yet pretty upbeat track, and then it shifts to a more whimsical and airy Inside Out, which I think is a clear highlight on this record. And actually, it's the most memorable song for me because it was a perfect running song.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was interested to hear your thoughts on that song because that is my favorite Spoon song.
No kidding.
Yeah, and
that's an unlikely pick for favorite Spoon song.
It is, and
it's not like a lot of other Spoon songs.
And I want to explain why, because really, when you look at that song, it doesn't have anything too memorable about it, like melodically. But I love it because it's a mood piece.
It's all about
atmosphere. And so for me, Jake, like, it's been interesting preparing for this because, as you know, work has been really stressful lately. And this is a song that no matter how stressed I am, no matter how anxious I am, every time I put it on, it calms me down. And it's just this nice 5-minute kind of meandering, structureless mood piece with a great just little relieving melody in the vocals. And I love it. It just calms me down every time I listen to it. So I love when songs can create an experience for you like that. And no other Spoon song really does that. From a songwriting perspective, It's probably not their best, but for that reason, it's my favorite. And that's what I love about this album, is because it's got a lot of moments like that. Little gems, little Easter eggs, and things that where the songs affect you in a way that to me exist outside of just focusing on things like melodies and items like that.
Time's gone inside out. Time gets to start again. There's a tense.
Yeah, Inside Out is certainly a mood piece, but I think that without David Friedman, I don't think you would have that song. I don't think it would have worked, because I think it harkens back to The Ghost of You Lingers on Gaga, Gaga, Gaga. But it's just a more perfected kind of version of that song, or in the same vein. And I think it succeeds because of that production touch. Also, Britt Daniels just simply controls the intensity of that song, and it's all in his vocals. It's just such a great song. Plus, it's a fantastic beat. And I think the one thing I've kind of learned over the years is, at least for me anyways, the quality of the beat, having a nice, well-defined beat throughout the song, really makes a difference in how I interpret the song. From there, the next track, Rainy Taxi, is just this... I love this. That's probably my favorite song on this record. It is just an attack on your senses. It's very hard rocking. Lots of very just visceral guitar accents that are thrown at you. Has a great chorus to it.
And if you leave, I'll never see another tune. Put on your red shoes.
Then it gets a little poppier with track 4, Do You, and then goes back to kind of that Rainy Taxi attack with Knock, 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 with it a little bit slower, and then really focuses on that clangy electric guitar, which that sense of separation I was talking about in the production and in the mixing. Man, does that make a huge difference on this record? And it's because it creates this like incredible dynamic contrast, and where a lot of artists will use like song structure to help convey dynamic contrast, which I think dynamic contrast is what really makes a song memorable. One of the key contributors to making a song memorable. What Spoon are able to do on They Want My Soul, and really exemplify on They Want My Soul, is that they don't need song structure to discern different dynamic pieces of the song. They can really use just whatever instrument is playing by turning it up and producing it in the right way, that it really adds the right kick at the right time and creates this huge wall of sound for a very explicit amount of time. And it creates just such an effect that it just pulls you in and makes the song super memorable. After that, I think the title track is really good. I like, with almost every Spoon record, the front half is, in my opinion, better than the back half. But I really, really think that this is a strong listen. They also kept it short. It's almost 38 minutes long. It's not quite as long as like the 43-minute Spoon albums, which have a tendency to not be as good, with the exception of Gimme Fiction. So.
Yeah, this one, the only two tracks that are a step down at all in quality for me are track 8, I Just Don't Understand, which is actually another cover. I think it works stylistically with the album pretty well. But then the closing track, New York Kiss, I'm not big on. I absolutely love track 9, Let Me Be Mine. And Jake, you mentioned the title track, track 7, They Want My Soul, which has one of my favorite Spoon lyrics in it. Once again, something that makes no sense but just sticks with me. Educated folk singers want my soul. I don't know what the hell that means, but for some reason I like it.
Educated folk singers want my soul.
I love on Knock Knock Knock, that's where you get a highlight of the production choices, where you have this acoustic guitar driven foundation of the song, but you have 2 takes of it that are hard pan to the left and right channels, and they're deliberately not in sync with each other. So they kind of go back and forth. It almost feels like a call and response between the 2 acoustic guitar takes. And then you just have the noisiest guitar stuff come in about halfway through the song, and I just loved that.
You said you were living in a buttoned up world, living in 1892.
And another note on the production, Jake, you mentioned that you feel like this album kind of oscillates, right? And I think that's also because, while, David Friedman was kind of the primary producer for this, they had actually worked on like half the songs with another producer, before that, and then worked on mixing those songs and producing the rest of the album with David Friedman. So because of that, you do have kind of a mix of approaches here, but I think that they bring it together to work really cohesively. I think, though, that They Want My Soul, while it's a step forward in production and sound for Spoon, I don't think they're necessarily doing anything too different in the songwriting. I think they're just kind of changing one element at a time, and here the big focus on the change is the production for me.
Well, Tom,
yeah,
that brings us to Hot Thoughts. 2017 came out in March. I remember this album dropped. I looked at the cover, and I think that the cover of this record is just pretty gorgeous. So the cover looks like a X-ray of a person's skull, but what's transposed like on top of it is just all these different colors, which maybe represents like different like parts of the skull or brain or something or emotions that you feel. It kind of mixing this putting kind of like the emotional color aspect onto the just black and white image of what a human is, or at least that's what the cover says to me, and I thought that was super intriguing. But
I think the red areas are the hot thoughts that are occurring within the that's my speculation.
That's deep. That's deep. So the first track is the self-titled track, Hot Thoughts. It's 3 minutes 49 seconds long, and that entire time is just sonic bliss.
Yes.
From the moment that I put this album on, I was excited about this song. It just grabbed me right away. It starts with just soft vocals and a little bit of synth, and if there was anything that I could say that describes the shift in sound between They Want My Soul, which was really kind of took all of the qualities of Spoon and took great production with David Friedman or however the heck you say the dude's name, and then you take that, and then what does Spoon do from there? Well, okay, they make Hot Thoughts, and it takes all the things that they were doing on They Want My Soul, and they had to add stuff to it, and what they added to it, I think, is they added higher use of electronic textures. This album, if anything, is more electronic than anything that Spoon has done before, and it kind of makes sense that Spoon would go this way now, but what I love about it is that they use this, as everything else in Spoon's music, as an accent piece, and that's very clear from the first track, Hot Thoughts, which just has this monumentally great beat, great melody. It has like the bells going on there, and it uses like subtle synths to really round out the sound.
It's all in my mind all of the time, yeah. Hot thoughts all in my mind all of
And once again, what's the chorus in that song?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
A lot of these songs are like that, but they're still very memorable. I mean, Hot Thoughts is a track, the moment it's over, I just want to hear that track again, but I struggle with myself because then track 2, Whisper I'll Listen to Hear It, is so damn good. And that's really the experience I had with this whole album, is that I want to listen to the whole thing again right when it's done, and every individual track I want to listen to again right when it's done, with maybe a few exceptions, but I think the highlights on here are very strong. But I totally agree with you, Jake. I think that what they've done on this album is that they've shown just the right way that a rock band should incorporate electronic elements into their sound.
Yeah.
Because I think too much what we're seeing people trying to transition things way too abruptly, and it doesn't always work. In fact, I think most of the time it just does not. But it works here because the songwriting calls for it. These songs are bouncier. They're more upbeat in general, but they still experiment a lot. I really like that halfway through the album, track 5, they have Pink Up, which is probably one of, if not the longest Spoon song out there at almost 6 minutes.
Totally.
And honestly, that song's not a highlight for me. It's not one of the catchier tracks. It's not one that I want to put on repeat.
But it's a nice transitional piece.
I still love it.
Yeah.
I still love it
Yeah,
for the middle of the album, after you've had this blitz of 4 very catchy pop songs, for them to do something less grounded and more experimental to bring in the last half of the album.
The second half of the album, track 6, starts off with Can I Sit Next to You, which is another just huge beat with a lot of electronic flutters.
Can I sit next to you? Can you sit next to me. Get the stars.
This album really focuses on dynamics. You hear less guitar, but yet guitar is still a present element in most of these tracks. Track 2, Whisper, I'll Listen to Hear It, and that's all one word. That's my favorite track on this record, and I cannot stop listening to that track. But I agree with you, the first 4 tracks are fantastic. Really, I like every song on this album, with maybe one exception, which we'll get to.
Okay.
But Whisper, I'll Listen to Hear It, what I love about that is that's a 2-part song. And while it is a 2-part song, it starts off and kind of like has this really melancholic electronic swirling that's going on before it shifts and really has like a great beat to it. It just captures the mood of the album really well. And also the closing track references the first half of that song, which I think is really neat.
I like that too.
But I also think that like track 7, I Ain't the One, which is kind of a synth key based ballad. I think it just has so much emotional conveyance there that it just works really well before going into kind of a more upbeat Tear It Down, which I think is a more traditional Spoon track, kind of one of their more like poppy airy tracks, but has a great chorus. Track 9, Shotgun, is the song that I probably struggle with the most.
Tell us now, little man, what's what? You're the one that had to go show this stuff. Oh, you're the one that
Has a driving guitar melody to it, but the beat on this song is super generic. Just
And it
just
doesn't
on beat. It's just like
it doesn't really go anywhere.
No.
And I see why that, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Jake, that the beats and beat choices are a big deal to you.
Yeah.
And I think that calls perfectly as to why you don't like Shotgun.
Totally.
And
Yes.
why you do like Whisper, I'll Listen to Hear It so much.
Yeah.
Because one thing that was a highlight to me that was a brilliant songwriting tactic, and credit to Jim Eno, the drummer of Spoon, for this, is you listen to Whisper, I'll Listen to Hear It, and there's that section where, gosh, once again, I don't know if you'd really call it a verse or a chorus.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a recurring segment where it'll kind of pick up and it'll do a driving beat on the hi-hat, but for like one bar. And then it switches to where he's just kind of pounding on the tom and snare
right.
for a bar. And he's never really settling into a beat. But that variety, the way that he mixes up, is what keeps the song moving and what keeps the song really interesting and diverse throughout.
Yeah.
So credit to the percussive writing on that song.
give me some spirit. Don't take too much to give me excited. Whisper, I'll listen to hear it.
And while this does use more electronic beats than really any album that came before it, Eno does a really good job on several of these tracks. Do I have to talk you into it? I love the drums on that song. I think that he really shines there, which that song is very well written as well.
Do I have to talk you into it? Do we have to make sense of it? Well, I know you're such a
Overall, I really think I like this album. It has really solid standout tracks, but it also flows very well as an album. I do have some beef with how the album ends. I personally don't think Shotgun is that strong of a song, and it was meant to be kind of like this loud. It's really the real last track of, like, content-wise, last Spoon song on the record, because the very last track is a saxophone bass instrumental track that does a little bit of sonic referencing to Whisper, I'll Listen to Hear It. But so Shotgun's really the last piece of Spoon, the actual Spoon song that you get. And I just don't think that it really accomplishes what it was meant to do. It's supposed to be a statement, but I'm not sure. Maybe that'll change. I've listened to this album probably at least 10 to 15 times at this point.
Yeah,
And
we were hooked on it.
yeah, I couldn't stop listening to it. And I really haven't, the thing with Velocities in Music is the amount of albums. When we're listening to like 40 plus albums a month, plus anything we do on the side on
Deep
our own,
dives, just
whether
for
it's
fun.
deep dives or just for fun, like listening to
What
vinyl or
records
something.
we're spinning,
right?
yeah.
Like we just listen to all of these albums. It's really hard to find an album that like you get addicted to, and I got addicted to Hot Thoughts.
Oh yeah, me too.
And that sounds funny when you say it. But like to feel that just need, that primal urge to listen to an album over and over again. That's special, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely had that click with Hot Thoughts. Now, I will say that when I first listened to this, before I like had made sense of everything, and then we decided we were going to do the Spoon deep dive and started listening to all of Spoon's discography, and I really I felt like I started to understand how Spoon transitioned album to album, which I think is so important for understanding an artist. I will say that I came down a little bit on Hot Thoughts. I don't necessarily think that this album is Spoon's best. It's not. It's not Spoon's best album. But I would rank it in the top half for sure. I think it's a really, really good album. And saying that it's in the top half, I'm not saying that like it deserves to be. Well, Spoon, all of Spoon's albums in their discography are so strong that saying that it's in the top half is saying that it's really good.
Yeah, back at the end of 2009, they were labeled by Metacritic as the best band of that decade. Just numerically, statistically, because of how strong Girls Can Tell, Kill the Moonlight, Gimme Fiction, and Gaga, 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 just on average for bands that released that much material during that decade, they had the highest average review. And I think they're totally deserving of that. You know, for me, one thing I'll put out there, you know, I like this band a lot, and I love that you can put on any of their albums and enjoy it front to back. But I will say, I don't think they're anywhere close to one of my favorite bands. You know, Jake, we've done artist deep dives for a number of our favorite bands: Blur, Radiohead, Metallica, The Smiths, The Beatles, right? For me, Spoon's not really up there, but I think they're such an intriguing band to listen to from beginning to end through a 9-album discography to see how they've evolved, and they're just such of a consistently high quality that they're worth looking into if you haven't listened to them much, and I'm really glad that we did this deep dive for that reason.
Where do you think they're going to go from here?
That's a good question. I think what they'll probably do is continue to incorporate these electronic elements. I actually think with Hot Thoughts, this is one of the biggest style changes that we've seen them do.
Yeah. The songwriting in approach to writing an album didn't change that much.
Right.
But from a sound perspective, you're absolutely right.
Right. So I don't see this being a one-stop album for this sound.
Yeah, you're right.
I see them continuing in this direction, but actually what I would maybe see them doing is taking some of those electronic elements, and I would like to see them work it into more of a piano sound, kind of similar to what we saw on maybe like Kill the Moonlight or Gimme Fiction. Because this album doesn't have a lot of that. You know, I Ain't the One has some keys, but really for incorporating electronics, I still think they make this a pretty guitar and drum album.
And it's very structured.
Yeah.
I think that if they were to go back to some of the, like Kill the Moonlight, where they're experimenting more and just kind of relying on atmosphere and Britt Daniels' vocals in bringing in some electronic textures and elements to that, they could do some really cool stuff if they went that direction.
But the thing is, this band, and this is not a criticism, they rely too much on Britt Daniels' vocals to stray too far from that.
Yeah.
His vocals are superb consistently. And if they...
That's like the Green Bay Packers not using Aaron Rodgers.
I'll take your word for it, as I say.
I mean, even you can get that reference. Come on.
I know.
Come on.
I do get what you mean.
He's Godgers.
You have your You have your star player, you know what their talents are, you know what they can accomplish, you're foolish not to highlight that, is what it comes down to.
Right.
And so I think Spoon will continue to find ways to highlight Britt Daniels' vocals, but I think the backdrop will continue to change. I would love to see, you know, some more of these tactfully integrated electronic elements into the sound. But actually, I would like to see it maybe even go a little bit darker than Hot Thoughts.
I agree. I think that'd be cool.
I think that'd be pretty neat. But you know, we'll see where they go. I'm sure whatever they do next is going to be really good.
As we do with all of our artist deep dives, I'm going to now enter into the part of the podcast where we rank Spoon's albums.
Do it.
So here I go. So my ranking of Spoon's albums. I'm going to start. My favorite album is Gimme Fiction. which I'm gonna give scores with this too, which we
Oh,
typically
all right.
don't do scores on the podcast, but
Yeah.
I thought for whatever reason I wanted to score.
I'll
it
match you. I'll do the same.
to kind of help me figure out where I would place these
For
things,
sure.
because to be candid, these are very close together. So I'd give Gimme Fiction like a 95. Girls Can Tell a 94, just slightly beneath Gimme Fiction. Then They Want My Soul, I'd give like 90, maybe 91. I mean, I really enjoy it. I love it when it's on. Hot Thoughts, I just settled on an 86.
Okay.
And so I view that as kind of like the upper tier. Gimme Fiction, Girls Can Tell, They Want My Soul, and Hot Thoughts. And that might be, I kind of feel like it's premature to put Hot Thoughts that high, but I've listened to it enough that I feel pretty confident in that. After that, I think you take a step down. You have Kill the Moonlight, which I'd give 81. Gaga, 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 79. Then Telefono at number 7 with 79. Transference at number 8 with 78. And A Series of Sneaks being my least favorite Spoon album at 77.
77. So that does confirm my suspicions that you do like Spoon a little bit more than me.
Okay.
But actually, I'm not really going to go much lower than you. I'm just not going to start as high. I think my scale is going to be a little more compressed. But my top is definitely They Want My Soul, which I would give like a 92, 93. My second pick would probably be Gimme Fiction at maybe around an 87 or an 88. My third pick probably would be Hot Thoughts. I'm going to put that high up there.
Over Girls Can Tell.
Over Girls Can Tell. I'd put that at probably about an 86, but honestly, Girls Can Tell, I'd probably give about the same. So those are probably about on the same level for me. From there, what do we got left? I'm going to go with Gaga Gaga Ga at probably like an 83. And then I'm going to go...
It sounds like you're ordering food.
I would like a chimichanga.
Pollo asada.
That's the chicken. Next, I'm actually going to go with Transference. Like I said, I like that one a bit more than you, and I would give Transference probably an even like 80. Then I would go... I'm actually gonna put A Series of Sneaks above Kill the Moonlight. I'm gonna go A Series of Sneaks at like 78. Kill the Moonlight probably at around a 77, and then Telefono at a 75 or 76. Mid 70s for me.
Makes sense.
All right.
Makes sense. I really can't disagree. We have different priorities.
Yeah. Well, right, and this is something that I'm sure, another band that everyone's ranking looks different depending on what they're looking for, but I think that's a testament to Spoon's variety and also just consistent quality, is that really the albums you're going to gravitate more to are just the ones whose styles and songwriting approach you like better, because I don't think there's really all that objective a difference in quality compared to other bands.
All right, for you listeners out there, Tom and I want to know, what are your top 5 Spoon albums and what are your top 5 Spoon songs and why? Let us know. We'd love to hear it. Whisper, I'll listen to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Comment, we'll read it.
Comment, I'll read it to hear it.
That was bad. Okay.
Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and your emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible. So, as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.